All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you guys finding time for this. As we work through this proposed new trade case, I'm going to err on the side of over communication. So until we get to the point where a coalition is formed and we move forward and we're set up in a meeting, a committee meeting, if you will, arrangement, I'm going to continue to work with the webinar format to keep you guys up to date on what the latest issues are and where we are in our walk here today. Okay, so just for everybody's edification on these calls, we're setting them up in GoToWebinar because it forces everybody to register, and that enables us to screen the call to be sure only folks we want in the meeting are in the meeting. I do want you to know that we are going to record it because there are several who said they couldn't attend today, and I'm going to record it and just issue those out to them individually. These are just to a couple of people, and they're to trusted people. Some of you have been a recipient of that in the past, and it's a way for us to continue to communicate and keep everybody on the same page. Joining me today is Jed Mandel. Most of you know Jed. Jed's been AEC attorney for many moons and has worked hard on the Wiley agreement, the agreement between Wiley and the coalition members. Jed's role in that was to protect AEC's interests by looking through the agreement and be sure that the AEC would not be liable for any of the legal bills in this matter. This was critical to us, and it would also state in the agreement that the AEC will provide a staff liaison to that coalition committee to take care of the business of the committee. Okay, so we'll get to that in a moment, but I wanted to set up a couple of things for everybody here. So I've got just a few slides, and I want to go through to give everybody updates kind of where we are. Here's where we are currently. So we've got the fourth quarter data was collected. Everybody saw that at the AEC conference. The legal view at that time, if you weren't at conference or don't recall, was that we do have a case now based on the data we have through the fourth quarter of 2022. But all indicators are that we will have a much stronger case and have the prospect of winning better and higher duties if we keep moving forward and collect the Q1 data from this year. So that is our next task right now as a group, is to get your first quarter 2023 data to Wiley as quickly as possible. This will tell us whether those calculations changed in the tariff. And it will, in my view, it will give us our most solid go or no go moment. There is the chance after we get through first quarter data that we would have to go into the second quarter data. That could be caused by one of two things. One is that we find that the first quarter data doesn't bolster our case, but we think the second quarter will. So if the analysis says keep moving forward, then that would be a reason we would move into second quarter. The second reason would be our own fault, and that would be that we don't turn this quick enough to where we have time to collect the data, run the calculations, get approval from everybody, and get moving so that we can file the case. And remember, whenever we close up on a given quarter, we only have a certain window of time after that to use that data for the filing. Otherwise, it slips into the future and we would have to go to the next quarter. So there's going to be a window of time where we can get the analysis, make the decisions, and decide if we want to move on this or not, or if we want to continue to collect data. So I want to be sure everybody understands that very clearly. Meanwhile, to the extent that they can with the budget we presented to them, Wiley is performing prep work on the case. So if the decision is to move forward, they've got a little momentum behind it. AEC is financing that. The board and the exec committee approved $600,000 for that effort earlier this year. The key issue in the agreement that we're going to discuss, and the key issue about that $600K, is that needs to be all there is. The AEC cannot afford to continue to do that. So to the extent we need to move forward in this case, it's going to have to come, the expense for that is going to have to fall into the hands of the coalition. I want to make something clear, though, about this agreement. This was a very complicated agreement. It took a couple of weeks between Jed and Wiley to hammer out the right language to achieve our goal of having AEC not be financially obligated to the case. And and that's important. However, this agreement is not between you and the AEC. This is not an agreement between the AEC and Wiley. This is an agreement that we're presenting here and we've distributed between you as a coalition member and Wiley. So it's between you two. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to get your in-home counsel to look at that agreement. And if you have questions or edits or suggestions, then you'll need to go to Wiley and negotiate. Now, to the extent edits are made, we're going to need to take a quick glance at it at AEC just to be sure we didn't slip during that process. Okay, so it does get a little complicated. So again, this is one of those issues you want to get moving on very, very quickly. And I've been getting this in folks' hands as fast as I could. So hopefully they can begin that process. Okay. But Jed is here today to answer some questions from the standpoint of the AEC, if you have any on that. So I've kind of gone through this. Remember, this sign-up sheet, as coalition members come forward, this is basically your sign-up sheet. This is your commitment to be a coalition member. The idea behind the coalition is that they will cover the costs of the trade case in the first 2 years. Well, I'll remind you what those costs are at the end of our call, but they would cover them for 2 years. After that, year 3, it is our ambition that the costs going forward would then roll into AEC dues and everybody contributes. This is just what we did with China, and we're trying to duplicate that for this one if that's what we decide to do. Okay, so with that, let me pull the agreement up and reintroduce Jed. Jed, welcome to the call. Folks, if you want, we can unmute everybody if you want to do it that way, if there are any questions, Nancy, or you could go ahead and just, to the members listening, attendees, you can just do it through the chat window. Just open up that chat window and type in your message. If you want to come to the presenters, you can, there's another window there you can come and send directly to whomever. Okay, so if we have any questions.
Thanks, Jeff. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, nice to have everyone on the call. I haven't seen you all in a long time, but I obviously wish everybody well. Hope everybody's doing well. So this is a little bit of a revision of Wiley originally trying to put a square peg in a round hole, meaning with this new matter, they were building on the experience that they had working with you all and AEC and the original AEC Trade Committee for the China cases and replicated here. The problem was it was a different set of participants or potentially a different set of participants, and key, as Jeff has already said, AEC wasn't really the party of interest here. AEC was not going to fund this matter. So we went around a little bit trying to take the square peg away, worked with Wiley, and one of the things that they made clear to me was they didn't want to represent and have to get individual agreements from a half dozen or a dozen extruders. They wanted to have a single entity that they can go to, and what they've done in the past before they had the experience with AEC was just form informal coalitions and then have that coalition through an agreement act on behalf of the individual manufacturers, extruders in this case, who are involved in the trade case. So the agreement that is now on the screen in front of you sets that up. There'll be a coalition. It won't be a new entity in the legal sense of having separate standing. It'll just be an informal agreement among those who sign up. As Jeff has already said, this is essentially a sign-up agreement to take on this new trade case. The agreement defines the trade litigation. It defines confidential information. It's that confidential information is stuff you should be very familiar with to the degree you were involved in the China case, because it's the same extreme sensitivity and need to protect confidential information. So there's a lot of provisions in here about confidentiality. Obviously, you should make sure that you feel adequately protected with how that information will or won't be shared among the coalition participants. And then there's some operating terms in the agreement that talk about, again, it's essentially pretty simple governance matters. Who's in, who's out, if you're in initially, but then you want to get out, how you get out. Again, you should take a look at that, make sure that you're comfortable with it. And then within these provisions is also where those who sign up as under this agreement and are part of this coalition appoint Jeff Henderson to serve essentially as the agents. So Jeff would have the authority to sign papers in the trade case, working with Wiley to make all the appropriate filings, because Wiley needs a client to sign off on that. So you all would be authorizing Jeff to act as your agent, but otherwise he has really no official role in this. And you'll note, and this was sort of key to finally getting to a place where Wiley and Jeff and I were all comfortable, AEC isn't mentioned anywhere. AEC just isn't part of this. To the point that Jeff made just before I started yapping at you, sometime in the future, if the decision is made that AEC will re-engage and start to take on potentially some of these expenses, this can always be changed and modified, and AEC can jump in. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Obviously, you should look at this. If there's some, sort of first-tier questions that I could try to answer, I'd be happy to try to do that. If what I've said hasn't made sense to you.
All right. Anybody have any questions on that at this point? All right, thanks, Jed. I'll tell you what, if you do.
I've got a question.
Oh, yes.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So if the coalition members, and let's say that Extruder A has their attorney review it and they want to make an edit to this agreement, would then all other coalition members have to agree to that same edit, or would it that edit only apply to them? How would that work? I just sense that everybody's probably going to have their attorney look at it, and every attorney is going to have a little twist, and then it could kick the can down the road quite a ways.
Well, that's a great question. You need to have a single agreement that everybody signs on to. Can't have separate agreements with separate terms. I'm guessing the way that will happen is that each of you will have comments. You'll suggest them to Wiley. Wiley will take those comments. They may say some they can't accept. Why they can't accept it, they may be willing to accept others. Presumably they'll put together a revised agreement that hopefully is acceptable to everybody. To Jeff's point, we want to make sure that in revising it, they don't do something that somehow brings AEC back into it. I don't think that will happen. And then everybody will sign, hopefully, a consensus agreement. I'm hoping, I'm listening to what Jeff said earlier, time is sort of the essence. I'm hoping this process doesn't take anything more than days and not weeks and months. But everybody needs to sign the same agreement.
So
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, Brooke. And for folks who may have not been there during the China case, we actually did it the way you would expect, with the traditional way that Jed was talking about, where the coalition was under the AEC banner. But there still was an agreement in place there, and we had to go through this. And there was an agreement between AEC and the attorneys, and we had a couple of in-house attorneys amongst the membership, including SAPA at the time, who helped us, and they really went through it. So I expect that there are going to be some edits. I expect that a lot of those edits will be similar, because folks will probably read this the same way, and then we'll let Wiley kind of work it out, stay in the loop. But Jed's right. This is why I wanted to get this out here. I sent it out a week or two ago. Hopefully somebody's taken a look at it already, and then to have the Q&A on the AEC side if there's any concerns. But we gotta get this piece of business behind us. But it's a big piece, because it's not only agreeing on the wording, but it's also that sign-up sheet, because once we have everybody agreed, then we're basically good to go, right? So it's a big deal. It's all of it. Other questions for Jed?
Question. Recognizing there's a number of coalition members and you're looking to, I don't know, a dozen at least, I'd hope there's a lot more than that. Bit presumptuous to think that in a couple of days or even a couple of weeks, you're going to get attorneys representing all coalition members agree or point out or want to argue particular points. You know, frankly, I just don't see that happening.
Well,
And I go back to Jeff.
here's
not
a
sure.
suggestion. Again,
ahead.
building on what was done in the China case, and I don't want to be presumptuous and sort of, volunteer folks, but if one or two of the companies with their attorneys are willing to take the lead and review this from an individual extruder perspective, I only looked at it from AEC's perspective, but look at it from an individual extruder's perspective and make any suggested edits. And I'm not presuming that edits are necessary, but obviously I'm not looking at it from that perspective. And then have those companies whose attorneys looked at it from an extruder perspective circulate any revised comments to everybody else, and hopefully they could sign off on it. Then you could present a unified set of recommended changes back to Wiley. That I'm just trying to think of a way to expedite exactly what you're saying, is you don't want this to spiral into wordsmithing that goes on for months.
Yeah, we can't have that. The whole thing will never get off the ground. And I'm happy to facilitate. I could talk to Robert. I mean, would a forum like this with a couple of those attorneys that you guys want, and having Robert and everybody just shows up at some kind of a webinar, a working webinar where they work through the edits and just try to plow through it? Is that even?
Maybe if it gets to that and we start having a lot of conflicts, I mean, my instructions to my attorneys, keep it simple unless it's absolutely necessary. Let's don't just start nitpicking, sorry, Jed, but as attorneys can do sometimes.
No, attorneys can be the worst. Absolutely.
There will be a couple of members who would probably just do it on their own anyway. Let me talk with a couple of those to see if I can help that way. But I like what you're saying, Brooke, and that would be the first step. I mean, look, guys, you're going to be signing up. I mean, if it's my business and I'm getting ready here to spend 6 figures at least on this over the next couple of years plus, I think I'd invest a little bit into an attorney and say, take a look, tell me what you think. And that's all we're asking here for the first round. If you can go through that and get that in a couple, 3 days, even by early next week, maybe we can have some opinions about what changes need to be made. And then we could set up a webinar and you guys can hash it out or do it however you want. But Andy, you raise a good point, but we're going to have to get through it.
Jeff, can you provide some color? How long did this process take for the China case? Do we have any sort of frame of reference there?
It took a few weeks because it's up, the legal analysis was a couple of weeks. Hydro was a separate company then, and they had their in-house legal counsel. And so those two attorneys worked together offline and pretty much came back with it. And the edits they made were accepted. So we got through it relatively quickly. There wasn't a lot of blood as far as the contract goes, because it's pretty straightforward. My expectation about certain things that could be controversial, I don't recall if there's any timeline in here, but I might see some attorney come back and say, how long are you liable? And they'd say, well, we're talking 2 years, and then it goes into dues. Somebody may want to insert something that says this agreement's for, the first 2, something of this nature to really kind of nail some things down, where we were trying to keep it a little bit nebulous so we have some flexibility when that time comes to do the right thing. But I think it'll be pretty straightforward. I would just ask everybody on the call, and those who aren't on the call, I'm gonna circle behind them to be sure they have this. My advice to you as a former extruder is that you have your attorney look at it just to see if there are any landmines in it for you particularly. And then let me know by email or whatever you think it's a good idea, and I'll try to recruit a lead attorney on this. Or if you have one you want to volunteer, shoot me an email and let me know. We'll see if we can get this rolling.
Hey Jeff, this is Fred. I got a question for you on item number 10 on the operating terms. Do you have any idea what the total cost will be over, let's say, over a 3-year period?
So the estimate here, I've got a slide here, Fred, that we can go through for some more exact, but I went to Wiley and asked them to take the number of pounds that were reported in 2022 as a baseline.
And how much was it?
And I don't know offhand. Whatever the total pounds were, and then they're saying that the first year estimate budget for 13 countries, or however many it ends up being, but it'll be some number around a dozen, would be $8.5 million between the time we file, or prep, file, and go through the final hearing. Then we go into the second year, if you will, and this agreement would cover the second year. I am estimating, Fred, because nobody knows, I'm estimating that year 2 costs will be 60% of year 1 costs. So if it's 8.5 in year 1, it's about 5 million in year 2. I based that upon what we experienced in the China case. In the first year after we won the China case, when the first review, the first annual review, which was just a few months later, came up, and the scope challenges started coming, we spent a huge amount of money in that second year, because this was a wake-up call to every extruder in China. And after not paying any attention to the trade case, as soon as it was done and final, they all came out of the woodwork, and we ended up with several petitions that we had to fight, and it was very expensive, and that's where we got in trouble. So Fred, my best guess for you now is to use Wiley's 8.5 million as year 1, and then year 2, I would say that we should count on it being about 5 million. Okay, now I've got a slide here to talk about what that cost is, but if you know what your pounds were in 22, the number is just under half a cent a pound. Okay, for year 1.
Okay.
Year 2 would be 60% of that in my estimate.
Okay.
All right, now let me go. Are there any more? And I'll come to that, Fred, because I did want to spend some time there, because I've had some questions as folks are saying, tell me again what this is going to cost. Tell me again. So I want to be sure we're clear. Are there any more questions about the agreement at this point? All right, let me give you these other slides here, because I think it might be helpful. Let me be sure. You're still seeing my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So here were the numbers that we looked at in wherever the hell we were in March. Okay, so if we have 15 companies come forward, which is the number of companies that has been kind of the core of this, the cost for a whole case, the 6 base countries plus another 7 or so, or whatever that total is of those smaller ones, would be $7.57 per short ton. And if you work the math out on that, it's like 0.35 cents. It's like 1/3 of a cent. It's a little more than 1/3 of a cent. I just don't have it up here. I asked them to look at it based on total pounds reported, and then dividing it by 8.5 million and total of dollars. And they told me they did it both ways. So here is one for dollars down here on the lower right hand. If all 15 with all 13 countries, it's $1.56 for every $1,000 of sales dollars you have. And they did an analysis amongst the various extruders to see what impact these different methodologies would take, and they found that there was very little variance. The most variance was 2%, so it's a very small variance. I suggest we stick with pounds, because I don't imagine, I was in the industry for 25 years, that's all we talk is pounds, so let's keep it to pounds. There will be other contributions. There are extruders who have not supplied data that have told me that they will join the coalition and pay their fair share. Okay, so there will be more than 15, or some of the 15 will drop out and we'll have 3 or 4 more come in to fill the void. I believe at this point, if this gets off the ground, that this is a pretty good estimate based on the way I'm seeing these things come together. I think that's probably pretty fair. I don't think it would be more than that, because we've already spent 600 grand of that, right? So we've already done it, and we've been working on this case every step of the way. So I don't know if the 8.5 will really fully materialize or not, but I still would budget for it just to be on the safe side. We will be also going to other extrusion members of the AEC. We will be going to producers, billet manufacturers, and suppliers, and they will all be asked to contribute. This will be my job. As I've told you all several times, we're gonna bring somebody in to take this case on and handle all government affairs because it's all gotten so big. And then my role is gonna be to raise money, because that's what I did for a long time. Earlier, as many of you know, see me walking down the hallway and you jump into the bathroom real quick, lock the door. So hopefully by getting other members to contribute in the first 2 years, it will not only lower your bill, but it will get them used to paying more than just AEC dues, so that when year 3 comes around, they may be just as relieved as you are to have everybody pay their fair share. Something though you need to think about, and we haven't figured this part of it out. This case is going to have a sunset review in 5 years. That is going to be a huge price tag, okay? I don't think it's going to be 8 million, but I'm going to say we're probably going to need about 5 million. And if and that's going to be an extra 2 or 3 million that we're going to have to come up with above whatever those dues were set, or we're going to have to set the dues to compensate. But just remember, even though we get into year 3 and things start calming down a little bit in the trade activity, that 5 year, especially that first 5 year renewal is going to be a big deal, and we're going to have to get through that financially. Now, what we did with Wiley in the past when we counted this is they gave us a flat annual cost, right? That we negotiated a flat amount, and we knew that in years 1 through 4, we wouldn't spend all of that most likely. So we'd have more by the time year 5 came to pay for that sunset review. That gave us a way to kind of balance out our budget. But after we kind of went through this, we got rid of that and we just went to straight billing, and we just saved the money. Okay, so rather than loaning it to them for 4 or 5 years before they spent it, we kept it. And then we would just pay the money out of those savings, if you want to think of it that way, for the sunset review. So with 13 countries, you know, these sunset reviews are going to be 200,000 to 500,000 a piece. It's going to add up very quickly. And I expect that the first sunset review would be pretty contentious, because countries that may have swung and missed in avoiding the tariffs in the first round will be taking another swing at it round 2. So I want that to be aware. Okay, so here's the cost, right? So if I'm you and you sit down, what am I saying? How many tons did you ship? Short tons, not metric tons. How many tons did you ship? 757 a ton. That's what you should budget. Now, this will not be a check that I come to you and say, or Wiley comes to you rather and says, you owe me 300 grand. This will be billed out monthly based on it, and you would be billed whatever your percentage is of the total. Okay? So whatever it is. If I collect $200,000 in donations from several people in a 90-day period, and all those monies come in, and we got 200 grand, in the next month, we'll pay the first 200 grand, and whatever's left over, you guys would split up. So we'll feed it that way. We're going to have to work on a good scenario, and I think this will be simple enough that we'll have to use probably an honor system for those who didn't supply data for their shipment pounds to get them calculated into this. They can send some kind of financial report or something to Wiley to confirm the number, but they won't be supplying data for whatever reason, but they still would be calculated in as a part of the fair share. And like I said, there are 3 or 4 of those extruders that have indicated to me that they would help. Okay, questions about the cost?
Hey, Jeff, it's Brooke. You know, in the assumption of the 15 members, obviously, you know, that has to represent a certain percentage of the, you know, the market supply, if you will, in order to cover the costs with your math. What's your sense? I mean, are we going to be struggling to get 15, or is 50, you know, is that a long putt, or is, you know, may we, you know, could we find ourselves with 25 members, you know, in the coalition? Do you have a sense of it at this stage?
I'd be stunned if we had more than 20, okay? And I don't think we're going to have fewer than 15. What I'm more nervous about, quite candidly to everybody on the call, is which 15. Obviously, some of those 15 swing a bigger bat than others, right? So we need the big bats in the lineup. And that's what I'm working on right now. And,
Yeah, that's, I guess, was embedded in my question, right? The fit, yeah. You gotta have some key players in that 50.
and I want everybody to know on the call, if I didn't have confidence that that was going to happen, I wouldn't be doing all this. I wouldn't drag you guys through this. We wouldn't do it if I didn't think that we could pull it off. If you want to do it, if I didn't think we could pull it off, I would have tried to torpedo this months ago. But I think this is very doable. And quite frankly, I think we're getting to a point as an industry, the way the tea leaves are, I'm not sure we're going to have any choice, quite frankly. And I think the decision becomes, do we do it as soon as we can while we still have some money in the bank, or do we wait until we're on our ass a year or two from now, and then we have no choice, and then we got no money? That's the question.
Yeah, well, at the rate that imports are going, if people have seen the latest Wiley info, they're not slowing down, right?
No, they're not. And they're not going to, because we know what happens in extrusions, right? They're
Yep.
tooling up. So, hey, if I'm buying it for 30 cents a pound cheaper overseas, then, how fast can you build my dies? And I mean, this is what we're seeing. And so it's going to grow. And 3% a year is a lot. That means that most of our owner operated one location members represent less than 1% market share. Okay. And we're losing 3% market share every year. That means we're losing 3 to 5 extrusion plants in the United States every year at this pace. Now, maybe it's not your plant, maybe it's not another, maybe they haven't closed yet. But I've been in this around long enough to know that if I've got a basket that'll hold 100, and I used to have 100, and now I'm down to 60, something's got to give. Something's going to have to be rationalized. And that's what we want to try to avoid. And for me then, and for some of you, you've invested, tens of millions of dollars in expansions and everything else, and you got to protect that. It's horrible. I hate this. I wish we would have had more success with circumvention challenges and 232s and everything else to prevent it. But I think everybody who's been following this knows that we tried and we couldn't. We did everything we can. Now, some of it's going to come, and I'll give you an update. Any more questions on cost?
Hey, Jeff.
Just a comment, Jeff. I think your analogy is very, very accurate with respect to our industry. I think, your typical owner operator with one plant is well under 1%. And that really paints a picture when you figure, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are going to fall every year if this keeps going. Because that's really what the math will dictates, right?
It does.
Yeah, it paints a very grim picture if we don't do something.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff, how many extruder members are there right now at the AEC?
Actually, I think the spirit of we have 62 or 63. I can't remember what number we're at right now, but some of those are foreign and everything else. I have a list. I'm actually developing a list right now, Fred, to go through and really, and it's going to basically be a hit list, if you will. I don't mean that literally, but it's just going to be our list of targets here to bring people into the coalition. And amongst those, I would say there's about 37, Fred. And of those, I'd say 10 of them are probably a real long shot. But I think 25 to 30 is not out of the realm. But some of these guys, they lay in the weeds, are not really very active in AEC, and it's going to be tough. It'll just really kind of depend.
Okay, so the 15 that you're targeting right now, what is the percentage they represent of the total pounds that
They're about 70, 75.
75%?
Yeah. Yeah. So we're talking, there are a couple out there that have enough volume to where they would help move the needle, but a lot of these are very small operations, Fred, that we'd be going after.
Yeah, I know. And, a half a cent per pound doesn't sound like a lot, but it adds up really quick.
That's right. It will. I mean, if you're doing, if it's whatever it was, if let's say it's half a cent, if you're doing 50 million pounds a year, that's $250,000. That's 20 grand a month plus, right? That's a couple, 3 employees. That's a lot. That's why I'm saying you guys got to be absolutely sure you're going to do this, because those checks will get harder and harder to write, and then they're going to get easier to write, because I am telling you guys, we launch this case and we get that relief by February next year, you're going to see orders raining down on your head. And if the market turns around and everything else, we better have those plants and those presses ready to go. Because we're talking a huge amount of volume here, guys. Huge volume. And some of these countries are so sensitive on the price. I just don't think that they're gonna, I don't think your customer is gonna stand for it. I think they'll reshore very quickly. So Fred, one last point on your ideas. I really do want to put a list together of the companies and, you know, kind of green, yellow, red, you know, who's in, who's on the fence, and who's said, hey, we're not going to participate at all. And once the coalition is formed and we get into this, you know, I'm going to need you guys to help me with that too. I mean, I can harass them, and I will, because it's kind of fun, but you calling them as a competitor and saying, hey, I'm writing this damn check, I'm hurting, you got to be hurting, you got to write the check too. That's very powerful. I got a lot more cooperation when I worked for SAPA raising money than I did as AEC president raising money, I'll tell you that. So I learned myself, depending on what your business card is, your story's a little stronger. All right, here's where we are on next steps. We've gotten through this, we've presented, now we're collecting the Q1 data. I should add in here to review and finalize the document we talked about today, but that'll be coming. If we get the data in by the end of this month, sometime in early to mid-May, you know, about a month from now, we'll have another webinar where Wiley can get on and present the data. And my expectation would be that it's a go, no-go decision, because by then we've got our contract, our agreement all worked out. We've got people lined up. We know who's in, who's out. Can do that. That's a tough putt, but we'll have to see if we can do it. If we don't get it, at least by early, sometime in the first half of May, I just don't know how we can file by the end of June, but maybe we can. But if we can file by June, you'd get your preliminary relief in February, and then the final determination would come sometime between May and August, depending, frankly, a little bit on what the government schedule is and when we can get in there. But the preliminary relief will have an impact. It did on China. In fact, that's what shut it down. By the time the final determination came, they were already done. Just a couple other things, because I get these questions. I want you to be aware of these other issues. I am still expecting the 232 aluminum extrusion tariffs to come back online. They're pushing out. There's what's going to happen here is they're going to announce through the Federal Register, they're going to announce a comment period. And we will work with Mayor Brown, our attorneys there, to come up with proper comments. I don't know if it's going to be a 30 or 45-day comment period, but it's supposed to be short. It won't be 90. After that, my expectation is, and I'm not sure how the mechanics of this work, but my expectation after the comment period is that our tariffs will come back online. They'll no doubt, they will not do it in arrears, so they're not going to make them, you know, they're going to make them retroactive. It'll be a go forward date. And I would guess they'd give everybody, you know, anywhere from 15 to 45 days notice that the tariffs are coming back on. I think that'll help. I mean, I must admit, I do think that'll help us some, but I don't think it's not going to touch Mexico. It's not going to help in the Dominican Republic. The gap is too wide, or Vietnam or Indonesia, most likely, but it may help at the Turkeys and the South Koreas and some of these, but I don't know. You know, that's, as I've said. I did hear the last meeting I had with DC, and this was just a couple of weeks ago. I had a chance to talk with the aluminum people in the administration a little bit, and there is a lot of heat towards Mexico starting to come up in DC. They're hearing it from the aluminum folks, they're hearing it from the steel guys. It's not all related to, you know, Russian metal or Chinese metal. No, this is just straight up Mexican, you know, as far as the government's concerned, it's just straight up Mexican production. They're doing a number of things. They're in violation of some labor agreement aspects of the USMCA. There's a growing storm there. Now I contrast that to 3 months ago. This was a third rail. You couldn't even talk about USMCA, but now it seems that the mood is changing a little bit. I also wanted to let you guys know we've talked a lot about Turkey. The administration knows exactly what's going on in Turkey. It's not just aluminum, it's steel. They're buying cheap metal units and they're translating it into cheap semi-fabricated products across the board. Are they going to do anything about it? They're not doing anything about it, but they do know about it, but nothing they're going to do. But I thought that kind of interesting. These issues that we talk about, and I didn't list all government affairs, just the trade related stuff. We're going to continue to work this. Don't think, this is an either or. We're going to keep working these issues and keep pressing on them because with or without a trade case, we're going to want this relief as a part of what we're doing. If I believe, though, that there was a real chance that Mexico would lose their 232 exclusion, I might ask you guys to rethink this trade case, but I think the chances of that happening within a year or year and a half are very, very low, very low. But there may be some pressure put on Mexico, but I don't think it's going to change behaviors. All right, those were just updates on some other loose ends. Any questions or thoughts, guys, before we close it up? All right.
Jeff, it's Brooke. I think it's interesting that the administration seems to understand Turkey. Everything that we've learned about Turkey, talking to suppliers and people in Europe or whatever, that there's a lot of jiggery pokery going on over there, but then there's geopolitical reasons that the administration won't challenge them. So it's interesting. But man, oh man, the stuff coming out of there is tainted big time.
Yeah, I think Turkey's become a very interesting country in this regard. Not really sure whose team they're on anymore, and they get that. And you're exactly right. It's geopolitical. It's just like, hey, we'll deal with the aluminum issues later. Right now, we're trying to prevent Turkey from signing up with the bad guys.
Yeah, and getting Sweden into NATO or whatever else is going on, right? So yeah,
all that. It's just a big mess, and who knows with all this. So I've been thinking about the trade case a lot, guys. This is really my highest priority, thinking about it, trying to be sure that I'm communicating. If there are things that you're not hearing, things you're not clear, things we're not doing, please let me know, okay? Because I don't want to be wrong any longer than I have to be. So if there's something or somebody I should be talking to, just shoot me an email, give me a call, whatever's best, and let me know so we can jump on it. Any other comments? All right, guys. Thank you all very much. Very much appreciate you, and have a great day.
thanks, Jeff. See ya.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.